Morgan Blake. Entry number 13. The Man in the Mirror. Sometimes, your reflection isn't just a reflection, sometimes it's something else looking back at you. What if I told you that not everything you see in the mirror is your own reflection, that sometimes there's something or someone staring back, waiting for the right moment to slip through? You'd probably laugh, but if you stay with me until the end, you'll see why I had no choice but to believe in the impossible. My name is Morgan Blake, and this is the story of the Man in the Mirror. It started like the faint tremor of an earthquake, a ripple in the calm sea of normalcy. Scattered reports surfaced online, people from different towns, different countries even, claiming to have seen something strange in their mirrors. At first, it sounded like a creepy internet meme or an urban legend made to scare people late at night. But there was something different about these stories. They weren't just spooky tales meant to entertain. They all shared a sinister similarity, the appearance of a shadowy man in the mirror. I'll admit, when I first came across the reports, I was intrigued but skeptical. After all, I'd made a career out of debunking the supernatural. I was no stranger to odd phenomena. For years, I'd been investigating so-called haunted houses, UFO sightings, unexplainable noises, and the occasional cryptid encounter. But this was different. The idea that your reflection, something so ordinary, so everyday, could be something more, something dangerous, unnerved me in a way nothing else had. It began with a woman named Sarah. She was a friend of a friend, a 20-something with an easy smile and a reputation for being tough as nails. When she called me, though, she sounded nothing like the woman I'd heard about. Her voice was shaky, brittle like glass about to shatter. "Morgan," she said over the phone.
"You have to help me. I don't know how to explain it. But there is something in my mirror. And it's not me."
My first instinct was to calm her down, ask if she'd been under any stress lately, maybe suffering from a lack of sleep. But she cut me off before I could start my usual line of questioning. "He's there, standing behind me," she whispered. "I can feel him, even when I'm not near the mirror. He watches me, he's waiting for something." At the time, I dismissed it as paranoia. Maybe Sarah had stumbled across one too many internet ghost stories or was going through a tough time. But as the days passed, more reports came in, each more disturbing than the last. People from different walks of life, all describing the same figure, a man in the mirror, shadowy and indistinct except for one thing, a grotesque, unnatural grin. Some claimed the man never moved, just stared. Others swore they saw him smile as if he knew something they didn't. A few described feeling like their reflections were no longer their own, like the man in the mirror had taken control of it. Still, I didn't believe it. I'm a man of logic, of reason. Mirrors are nothing more than glass and silver, tools to reflect light, nothing more. That's what I told myself. Until the day he appeared to me. It began subtly, as these things often do. A fleeting sensation that something was out of place. I would glance into a mirror and, for just a moment, feel as though my reflection lagged behind, just enough to make me question what I had seen. My reflection, the one I'd seen my entire life, started to seem wrong. At first, it was easy to brush off. Fatigue, stress from my cases, maybe an overactive imagination sparked by the recent surge in mirror-related reports. After all, the mind can be a tricky thing when it's tired. But over the next few days, the sensations became more frequent, more persistent. Every time I passed a reflective surface, I felt watched, like my reflection was observing me rather than simply mirroring my actions. One evening, the strangeness took a turn for the worse. I was working late in my home office. The room was dimly lit, the shadows long and deep. The glow from my desk lamp was the only light, casting a warm circle around me. I stretched, my tired muscles protesting, and glanced absently at the mirror hanging on the wall opposite me. And that's when I saw him. At first, it was just a flicker, an indistinct shadow at the corner of my vision. But as I turned to face the mirror, I saw it clearly. There, standing just behind me, was the figure. His face was a blur of darkness, but the grin was unmistakable. It stretched across his face in a way that no human mouth could, wide and grotesque, like a predator baring its teeth. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The room suddenly felt colder, as though all the warmth had been sucked out in an instant. My eyes met his, though his face was little more than a shadow. His grin widened as if he knew I could see him. Instinct took over, and I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. But the room was empty. I was alone. I turned back to the mirror, my pulse racing, but the figure was gone. It was just my reflection, staring back at me, wide-eyed and pale. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe a trick of the light or a figment of my exhausted mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had seen him. And worse, he had seen me. In the days that followed, the figure in the mirror became a haunting, omnipresent force in my life. At first, he appeared only in the corners of my vision, a dark shape that seemed to vanish when I tried to focus on him. But it didn't take long before he made his presence undeniable. I started seeing him everywhere. Every reflective surface, windows, puddles, the glossy sheen of my phone screen, became a portal through which he watched me. His silhouette lingered just out of reach, his smile twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. He was always there, lurking behind my reflection, waiting for something I couldn't comprehend. I tried everything to make it stop. I covered the mirrors in my house, thinking maybe if I didn't look, he wouldn't appear. But that didn't work. If anything, it made things worse. He started appearing in reflections I couldn't avoid, the glint of light off my coffee mug, the polished surface of a picture frame, the shine in the window at night. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape him. And then the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely audible murmurs that could have easily been the wind or my own thoughts. But as the days passed, they grew louder, more insistent. Whenever I was near a reflective surface, I heard them. Words I couldn't quite make out, spoken in a low, raspy voice. It was like someone was trying to speak to me from the other side of the mirror. The most terrifying part wasn't the whispers, though. It was the smile. Every time I saw him, his grin seemed wider, more grotesque, as if he was mocking me, daring me to look away. I could feel him getting closer, pressing against the barrier that separated us. It was only a matter of time before he broke through. And then came the dreams. The first dream was almost too real. I was standing in front of an old, antique mirror, the kind you might find in a dusty attic. My reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. My face was blurred, distorted, like a photograph taken out of focus. As I watched, my features melted away, replaced by his. The man in the mirror. He grinned at me, his shadowy face stretching into a smile far too wide to be human. I tried to step back, but my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, frozen in place as he pressed his hand against the inside of the mirror. I could see the glass bending under the pressure, spiderweb cracks forming around his fingertips. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the taste of fear bitter in my mouth. But the worst part was that the dream didn't fade. Even after waking, I could still feel him, his presence lingering in the dark corners of my room, watching, waiting. The dreams became more frequent after that, each one more vivid than the last. In every dream, I found myself standing before a different mirror. Sometimes it was the antique mirror from the first dream, other times it was a small hand mirror, or even a full-length one in an unfamiliar bedroom. But in every dream, the man in the mirror was there, his grin stretching wider, his fingers pressing harder against the glass. Each time, the cracks spread further, and I knew that soon he would break through. I couldn't go on living like this, haunted by the man in the mirror. I needed to know who, what, he was. And more importantly, how to stop him. I threw myself into researching mirror legends and lore, diving into old books and obscure corners of the internet. What I found was terrifying. Across cultures and centuries, there were countless stories of entities that used mirrors as gateways between worlds. In some myths, mirrors were said to trap souls, while in others, they were seen as doorways to other dimensions, capable of summoning dark forces. The more I read, the more I realized that the man in the mirror wasn't just a ghost or a hallucination. He was something far older and far more dangerous. He was a parasite, a creature that fed on the fear and despair of its victims, growing stronger with each passing day. I found stories of people who had been haunted by similar entities. In every case, the victims reported seeing shadowy figures in their mirrors, figures that grew more tangible as time passed. Eventually, the figure would break through, taking the victim's place in the physical world while trapping their soul in the mirror forever. It was happening to me. And if I didn't stop it, I would be next. I wasn't the only one who had been marked by the man in the mirror. Sarah had called me again, her voice barely recognizable. The vibrant, confident woman I had known before was gone, replaced by someone barely holding on. She told me that the man in the mirror had become a constant presence in her life, appearing in every reflective surface, just as he had with me. "He's getting closer," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can feel him. It's like he's inside me, pressing against my mind, trying to break through." I could hear the fear in her voice, and it mirrored my own. We were both running out of time. Sarah had tried to stop him by covering all the mirrors in her apartment, but it hadn't worked. He still found her, lurking in windows, in the reflection of her phone, even in the polished surface of her kitchen counter. She was trapped, with nowhere to hide. "I don't think I can hold him off much longer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's almost here." The line went dead. Panic surged through me. I had to do something, but I had no idea what. I raced to Sarah's apartment, hoping I wasn't too late. When I arrived, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the place was a mess. Every mirror had been shattered, shards of glass littering the floor. Reflective surfaces were covered with cloth, or scratched beyond recognition. But Sarah was gone. There was no sign of her anywhere. It was as if she had simply vanished. The only clue was her phone, lying face down on the floor. The screen was cracked, and in the fractured reflection of the glass, I saw him. The man in the mirror. I knew then that Sarah was gone, trapped on the other side, just as the stories had warned. With Sarah gone, I was more desperate than ever to find a solution. I couldn't let the same thing happen to me. The man in the mirror was getting stronger, more persistent. He no longer just appeared in reflective surfaces. Now, I could feel him even when I wasn't near a mirror. His presence clung to me like a shadow, a constant, oppressive force that grew heavier with each passing day. Objects around me began to move on their own, small things at first, like a cup shifting slightly on the table, or a book falling off the shelf. But soon, it escalated. Lights flickered, doors slammed shut, and I heard footsteps in the empty halls of my home. I knew it was him. He was no longer content with watching. He was pushing against the barrier between us, growing closer to breaking through. That's when I received the package. It arrived on my doorstep one evening, an old, tattered book with no return address. Inside, I found a journal, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was cramped and difficult to read, but as I skimmed through it, I realized it contained exactly what I had been searching for. The journal belonged to a man named Jonathan Harker, dated back to the late 1800s. He had written about his own experience with a mirror entity, a creature that had haunted him for years, just like the man in the mirror was haunting me. Harker had eventually found a way to stop it, but the process was dangerous. It involved a ritual to trap the entity back inside the mirror, sealing the gateway before it could fully break through. But there was a catch. If I failed, the entity would not only be freed, it would consume me entirely, taking my place in the physical world and trapping my soul in the mirror forever. I didn't have a choice. It was either try the ritual or let the man in the mirror take me. The night of the ritual, I prepared everything carefully, following the instructions in Harker's journal. I gathered the necessary items, candles, salt, and a mirror that had never been used before. The mirror was crucial. It had to be free of any past reflections, untouched by the entity's influence. I set up the ritual in the middle of my living room, the air heavy with anticipation. The candles flickered in the dim light, casting long shadows on the walls. I could feel his presence growing stronger, pressing against the barrier that separated us. He was close. Too close. I stood before the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. My reflection stared back at me, but I knew it wasn't really me anymore. It was him. The man in the mirror. His shadowy form began to emerge, his grin wider than ever. His eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel his presence pressing against the surface of the glass. The mirror began to crack under the pressure, spiderweb fractures spreading across the surface. I began the ritual, chanting the words from Harker's journal. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to keep going. The figure in the mirror recoiled, his grin faltering for the first time. The air around me grew colder, the candles flickering as the entity fought back. The mirror shook violently, cracks spreading further. His hand pressed against the glass, shards falling to the floor as he tried to break through. I could feel his rage, his desperation to escape. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. With one final incantation, the mirror shattered. The figure let out a silent scream, his face twisting in fury as he was pulled back into the void, disappearing into the darkness. The room fell silent. It was over. It's been weeks since that night, and I haven't seen the man in the mirror since. But I can still feel him, lurking just out of sight, waiting for his chance to return. I've learned to be cautious around mirrors, to never linger too long in front of them. Because I know now that some reflections aren't just reflections. Some are doorways. And some things are waiting on the other side, waiting for someone like me to let them through. If you ever catch a glimpse of something in the mirror that shouldn't be there, if you ever see a shadowy figure with a twisted grin staring back at you, don't look away. Watch carefully. And whatever you do, don't let it through. Because once that door is opened, it may never close again. Morgan Blake. End of entry.